Now let's hear the story.
Our scripture reading comes from the book of Luke, chapter 9, verses 28 to 36, the Transfiguration. Now, about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took up with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking about his exodus, which he was about to fulfill in Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but as they awoke, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us set up 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not realizing what he was saying. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then, from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. May God bless the reading and hearing of these words.
So that is the story of the Transfiguration. This moment is in the New Testament books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the gospel accounts of Matthew and Mark and Luke. It is not in John. John's portrayal of Jesus' kind of otherworldly self and connection to the divine centers around his friend and disciple, Lazarus, and Jesus bringing Lazarus back from the dead is in the Gospel of John, is really Jesus' big divinity moment, other than the resurrection. So Lazarus isn't in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and the Transfiguration isn't in John. They have different focuses. So this is a traditional church holiday. Back when we were all one church, it was a feast day, the Feast of the Transfiguration. There's been a church on the traditional spot where this happened since the 4th century. AD. There's been a church of the Transfiguration on Mount Tabor in Galilee, North Palestine, North Israel, and it's on the way from Nazareth to the Sea of Galilee. It's the traditional spot because it's the highest spot between where Jesus lived and the Sea of Galilee. So when the Gospels say Jesus went up to the high mountain, it's kind of the only choice in the whole region. So we built a church there in the 4th century, and since then we've been celebrating the Feast of the Transfiguration. This is one of the more mystical moments in the gospel accounts. It's not necessarily it doesn't necessarily teach us anything or tell us what to do on a Tuesday afternoon as a Christian person. Because guess what? It's not actually about you. It's about Jesus. This is one of the more mystical, weird passages in our Gospels. Some people think that this is actually a part of the resurrection story that got shuffled earlier into the Gospels somehow. So anyway, Jesus takes the usual suspects, Peter, James, and John. These are the 3 guys that anytime Jesus goes off alone, separate from the 12 or separate from the bigger group of the disciples, it's Peter, James, and John. and it's always those guys. The Gospels never say Jesus went off with Bartholomew and Thaddeus. And no mention of those guys ever other than their name in the list, right? Every time Jesus goes off to pray or something, it's Peter, James, and John. They go up to a mountain, and as presented in Luke, they go up to the mountain to pray because Jesus wants time in prayer. And while he is praying, the disciples fighting sleep, because every time he takes them to go pray, they fall asleep. While he's praying, Jesus changes in front of him and starts to shine. That's where today gets its name, the Transfiguration. His appearance changes before them. He starts shining from the inside out. And he has this little project status meeting with Moses and Elijah just to kind of see how everything's going. And Peter suggests that they stay on this mountain, it's not clear whether he meant with Moses and Elijah, like Moses and Elijah and Jesus would all just stay put on this mountain, or we should make this spot a holy place, which it eventually does. But God actually interrupts Peter. I don't know if you noticed that. While he was still speaking, we should stay here and build some tents. The cloud shows up. And God actually interrupts Peter in this moment. So like Moses and his time on Mount Sinai, receiving the law and the commandments, like Elijah, who's standing with Jesus in this moment on Mount Carmel, God's presence shows up in this overwhelming cloud of holy presence. It's a pretty standard depiction of God showing up in the Hebrew Bible. And a voice comes out of the cloud. In my head, it's Morgan Freeman. I don't know who you hear when God speaks, but it's Morgan Freeman's voice in my head that this is, and repeats what the voice from the cloud said at Jesus' baptism. When the dove comes out of the cloud, that top window, when the dove comes out of the cloud and says, "This is my son," in Luke, it actually says, "You are my son. I'm proud of you. You, my beloved." And now, in the Transfiguration, it says, "This is my son." It's like the baptism message is for Jesus to hear. And the Transfiguration message, the voice from the cloud is talking to the disciples. "This is my son. Listen to him." And then everything goes still. The cloud dissipates, and Jesus is standing there alone. And Peter and James and John are so struck by the experience that they don't tell anyone about it. The gospel, according to Matthew and Mark, on the way down, Jesus tells them not to tell anybody about him. But in Luke, it's the confusion and the chaos and the emotion of the moment. It is the event itself that causes them not to say anything to anybody else. So I'm going to get into it today. Have you ever had a mystical experience? Some sort of connection or presence with something that physics cannot explain? Because according to Pew Research, in 2023, 45% of people in America have. 45% of people say that they have experienced something otherworldly. 30% of people, 3 in 10, say that they have come into contact with a presence from somewhere else. According to the same study, atheists and agnostics are more likely to say they have experienced something mystical than believers. That That's interesting. Atheists and agnostics are more likely to say that they feel a deep sense of wonder about the universe and the unknown than believers do. That's a notable statistic. 60% of atheists and 58% of self-identified agnostics is higher than Christians who say they wonder about the universe and the unknown. So about half of Americans in 2023 say that they have had some sort of connection, some sort of experience with something outside of this reality, and something that physics and metaphysics and what we know about the universe can't explain. And I think on rare occasions that we've all witnessed someone, or maybe even ourselves, connect to something other. We used to call it being in the zone, right? We used to say somebody was in the zone, like they've tapped into something extra, something beyond themselves. Now it's like somebody goes God mode, is what they say, what the kids are saying nowadays. That somebody goes God mode. And there's superstitious reactions to these moments, right? What do you do in the 7th inning when there hasn't been any hits in the game yet? You don't say, this looks like it might be a no-hitter, right? Because you're going to jinx the no-hitter. We don't talk about a perfect game as it's happening. There's no rational, logical reason we don't talk about a perfect game while it's happening, but none of us do. We can tell when these moments are happening, when people have entered into a higher level, a different place than normal. You'd never interrupt somebody when they're in the zone. They might lose the connection and not be able to get it back. Now, there's probably something psychological happening, and there's probably something about concentration and all that, but that can't be it. That can't be all it is. Most of the moments in my head when I think about people getting in the zone or going God mode, most of them for me are guitar solos. I mean, that's just for me. I feel like David Gilmour in his guitar solos in Comfortably Numb found another world and expressed that world through his guitar. Prince's Super Bowl halftime show in the rain, that was something else. Jimi Hendrix's solo in Machine Gun on New Year's Eve, 1969, at the Fillmore East. The greatest live guitar solo that has ever been caught on tape. We all have seen these experiences where somebody, or maybe even us, have tapped into something else, something otherworldly. So while Jesus is praying, Jesus taps into something other. And Luke is very clear to say that it is because Jesus is praying that he has this experience. Matthew just says it's the event itself. It's almost like in Matthew and Mark, he went up to the mountain because the transfiguration was getting ready to happen. Luke is very clear that Jesus' meditation and Jesus' prayer in this moment was the gateway to this experience. And he's joined by others who have spent time in the direct presence of the Spirit of God. Only Luke says while he was still praying, the appearance of his face changed. That's different than the original account. But Jesus finds something else, connects to something otherworldly, whether it's in himself or from something outside of himself. Jesus connects with divinity in this moment. And the disciples almost miss it, like they typically do. Every time he takes Peter, James, and John out to pray, they fall asleep. and he has to come and wake them up. So they say that they're weighted down by sleep in Luke, so it either reads, because they stayed awake, they saw him with Moses and Elijah, or after they woke up. The Greek says can be translated both ways. But I understand. Sometimes the fastest way I can fall asleep in my life is to say, okay, well, now I'm going to pray. I hope you understand what I mean. Like, nothing makes me fall asleep faster than me saying, okay, it's prayer time now. Like when I slip into a prayer, when I'm like just going about my day and just kind of slip into a moment of connection with God, that's fine, whatever. But when I sit down and say, these 30 minutes are going to be my prayer time, just immediately out. So I get it. But because they stayed awake or because they woke up, they witnessed Jesus it is because they stayed aware and they fought off this grogginess and this weariness that they had this experience and witnessed the glory of God. Now I know that I, as a preacher, tend to emphasize the human moments. I tend to emphasize human Jesus, Jesus' human life, and how he shows up in spaces, how he treats people, and how that tells us how we're supposed to treat people. I spend a lot of time with Jesus' humanity. And I think a lot of us who like to consider ourselves more rational, more progressive, more modern in our theology, we have trouble with the divinity of Jesus Christ shining through. As evident in that number of atheists who wonder about the universe more than Christians say they do. We want to know how to help other people. That's what we want to know. We want to know how to live our lives as Christians. And I'm not sure the Transfiguration has anything to offer us there. But because I do that, I don't want anybody to take me wrong or mistake me in any way. Jesus Christ of Nazareth is God, is the presence of the divine in human life. Jesus is the reign of God, the kingdom of heaven. One author says Jesus is the kingdom of heaven with a face. And that's 100% in my theology and in my beliefs. What I think we get into trouble is when we say that Jesus is the only presence of the divine. I think Christians get into trouble when we say that this single individual person who didn't see the age 40, who lived in the ancient Near East, who didn't even know there was an Australia, let alone like what we know about the universe, is the only way to experience God on earth, or is the only presence of God on that. I think that's the trouble that we get into. But that doesn't mean that I don't believe that Jesus is the presence of God on this earth. And in the Transfiguration, that shines through. Jesus Christ of Nazareth tapped into something else, something from the other side, something from outside of our reality that we call divinity. Jesus tore open the heavens and brought them to us. His presence is God. His presence in that other place sometimes shone through him. That's what makes those human moments so powerful and meaningful. Because it's not what would Jesus do. It's what would the presence of God do? feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the sick and imprisoned, care for the orphan and widow. That's what makes those human moments in Jesus' life so powerful. When Jesus' divinity shows up, how does he use it? He uses it to feed hungry people when there's not enough food. He uses it to heal people who are suffering either in their spirits or their psyches or their bodies. When divinity shows up in Jesus' life, he uses it to hear people's pain and to sit with them and to see them. And sometimes I need a little otherworldly. I need something else right now. I need something from the other side right now. I need some God mode Jesus. I need pillars of smoke by day and pillars of fire by night. I love the practical stuff. I love the love your neighbor stuff and the feed the hungry stuff and the what would Jesus do stuff. But sometimes we just need to sit and in wonder and awe about who Jesus is and who Jesus was. The Transfiguration doesn't necessarily teach us how to live a Christian life. It's not its intention. Maybe it's not about you. It's about Jesus. Transfiguration Sunday is a moment for us to sit in the glory of God. And to know, as our song said, as Anne Frank says, that when we look at the universe, that's when we can tell that it is going to be okay. There's going to be a lot of pain, and there's going to be a lot of struggle, and there's going to be a lot of challenge. But if we look into the glory of God, that there is going to be an end, that there is going to be a balance. And we are here in this moment now of every day being reminded of just what human beings are capable of. And of what people are capable of doing to other people. And I need some God stuff. I need some glory and some awe and some revelation. Some of that old-time religion, just without the racism and sexism and all that stuff. That song just repeats, "Give me that old-time religion," over and over and over and over again. It never actually says what it is. But anyway. So we sit in this moment to understand that our biggest challenges, our absolute most desperate and most vulnerable and most life and death struggles on this earth, in universal terms, are inconceivably small. That God works in eons, not presidential terms. That God works on a universal scale. And we need to be reminded of that every once in a while. But then, like the disciples, our temptation is to then just stay there. Just when we get to the universal part, when we get to yes, we are a speck compared to the rest of the universe, none of this actually matters. We kind of just want to sit there, especially those of us who are not actively, acutely in danger and being harmed by the temporal decisions of people. It's easy for us to say, yeah, but Jesus is still Lord. Well, okay. Yes, but Jesus is not hurting people with political decisions. Yes, Jesus is still on the throne. Yes, Jesus is still Lord, and God is in control. It's easy for us to say that. Yes, things are bad, but we've been through bad times before, is one of my favorite things that's been said in the past 6 months. We've seen worse. Well, yeah, but we fought 2 world wars about it. And 10 million people had to die before we got through that bad time. So that's a little empty. Our tendency is to want to stay there, like Peter. This is how we want our Jesus, shining through the glory of God. Let's build some tents, let's build our altars, and we'll just stay in this moment. And Jesus says, no, this is just a little breakthrough, but now there's work still to do. But I hear a lot of Christians saying, yes, it's bad, but God is still in control. That doesn't actually tangibly help anyone. And it makes me think of improv and how Christians love the first rule of improv is not yes, but. It's yes, and. Yes, Jesus is Lord, and God is still enthroned on high, and Jesus is everything that God is, and people are still starving. And we say, Jesus, let's just stay here. Let's just stay in this place. And Jesus says, no, we got to go back down. There's still work to do. This is not complete yet. The Transfiguration Sunday is a chance for us to sit with who God is, with who we think Jesus is, with what we believe about Jesus, and then in that glory, through that glory, get back to work.